This is Hiring on All Cylinders. Live from HR Tech. Hello, my sweet, beautiful recruiting and HR friends out there in podcast land. And here, joining me at HR Tech, Rob Stevenson for Hiring on All Cylinders once more. And I am very thrilled to introduce my current guest, Daniel Chait. He is the CEO of Greenhouse. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to talking.
Greenhouse is a really powerful ATS. I love using it. It's an awesome company full of really great people as well. So really glad you could swing by.
I agree.
Joining us, my boss and CMO of Entelo, Scott Jones. Scott, glad you're here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, Daniel, you have a session tomorrow, how Stitch Fix uses data to optimize high-volume recruiting. That's at 9:30 Friday morning. What are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, so a lot of what we talk about is showcasing customers that are being smart about making the shift from kind of the old HR reactive administrative mindset to kind of the new model that new people teams are having around using data and being strategic and trying to think about how can they have a lot of impact on their organization, and fundamentally, how can they help their companies maximize their investment in human capital, which is a huge investment. If you're hiring a few hundred people, that's a multi-million-dollar investment that your company's making. And if you're not using information and data to do that at scale, then you're wasting tons of money and you're causing a ton of pain. So, they've done a tremendous amount of hiring. Stitch Fix is one of the fastest growing companies around. They've hired thousands of people. And so they've had to get really smart about using data and metrics, not only to manage and govern the process, but to make sure that they still instill their culture and what makes Stitch Fix special in the people that they're building their organization out of.
Definitely. So maybe not just in Stitch Fix, but in general, what are some of those areas right off the bat that HR teams can sort of focus on and optimize to iron out the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we try to keep in mind is, when you were in the old HR landscape, you were primarily there to shuffle paperwork and hope the company not get sued.
Right.
And today you're there to help build the organization and shape strategy. And so what we talk about is the company is dying for you to have that type of impact. They want you to have that type of impact. And as HR professionals, we're so used to kind of being beaten down and being disempowered and disabled that I think that shift has come so quickly, not everyone's had the time to realize it. And so if you start to think in this new people team mindset and you think, well, what's the ways that I can impact the value of an employee over their lifetime, which we'll get to, then you start to see maybe it's not so much a question of should we have more free cookies in the break room, or can I make my people fill out this form every quarter? And it's actually how do we make sure that our employees are more aligned with the company's mission and values? And how do I make sure that our managers are doing a good job at managing? And how do I make sure that my best employees stay the longest? And these are way more important questions that can add a lot more value to your organization, and that can be much more informed by data and by process sort of thinking.
Yeah, so I kind of glazed over that before, but I don't want to skip it. You mentioned that it wasn't just important to iron out processes, but using it to take a look at your culture, and specifically with Stitch Fix, how they could sort of continue growing that and keeping it.
Yeah, I mean, culture is one of those words that can sound a little bit squishy, especially if you're a business person and your HR person comes into the room and says, we need to invest in culture. You just often hear, dollar signs because, they want more ping pong tables and, they want more free sushi or whatever.
Right.
But I think that completely misses the point. And culture is real. Employee engagement is shown to have tremendous impact on performance, on business results across a wide range of metrics. Gallup and others have done lots of studies on this. And so what we're trying to do is help recruiting teams and people teams bridge that gap and helping them build the language and the tools to talk to their business in more business-friendly terms about the kinds of impact that they're trying to have. And the kinds of changes that they can make in the way the organization acts so they get their value. If you think about the kinds of complaints that you hear about recruiting, so often it's this helplessness. It's this kind of just sad, slump-shouldered, boy, there's no candidates out there. Everyone's already got a job. What are you going to do? And what I would say is if you talk to a sales team, you almost never hear that. you almost never hear salespeople going like, geez, boss,
No more companies to sell to.
there's no customers
Right,
out there,
yeah.
right? What are you going to do? They get out there and they sell and they compete.
Yep.
And they manage a tight funnel, and they know what's happening in each of those stages, and they manage the performance of their team. And guess what? It works. And so when you look at the capabilities and the behavior of a high-performing recruiting team, you see exactly the same stuff. They know what happens in their funnel. They're proactive about trying new things and measuring their impact. They know where they can source diverse candidates to move the needle on those type of metrics. And then they measure everything, and they test what works and doesn't, so that constantly improving over time. And that sort of competitive mindset of being in the driver's seat is, I think, the hallmark of a successful kind of new organization. And that's certainly what we've tried to empower at Greenhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that image of like the slump-shouldered recruiter, because you do see it a lot. And it's interesting. I mean, you look around the show floor, there's so many different recruiting technologies out there, and companies are still reporting hiring as this monumental challenge. So is there a gap between technologies and hiring needs? Is it just an attitude thing like you kind of prescribe, where it needs to be more like a regimented sales-like process? What's sort of the gap there?
I mean, certainly when we started Greenhouse, we're now in our 5th year. And in 2012, there was an immense gap, I would say, as you said, between the technologies on offer and the needs of what the organizations wanted and needed in order to succeed. And I think the way that I would represent that gulf or that gap is that the technologies were still there to serve that old administrative mindset. So you had stuff that you could stick paperwork in, and you had stuff that you could use to like track things and not get sued, but there wasn't anything that was actually, how do I get better? And what I would say is that our generation has now driven this change to this new mindset of how can we actually perform better as an organization. And what you're seeing is, Greenhouse, of course, in the ATS space has added on the idea of strategy and of collaborating with hiring managers and interviewers to empower them to do a great job interviewing and assessing candidates. But across the landscape, and if you look around in this zoo of a trade floor here at HR Tech, what you see is that vendors are increasingly now talking about strategic impact, behavior change, driving business results, and that's a huge shift. Certainly when we launched, we did a survey of our competitors' marketing position, and we said, well, what are the ATSs typically saying? What they typically were saying was, recruiting is a hassle, right? It's annoying. Nobody wants to do it. It's boring. It's worthless. Yes. We're going to make it so easy that you can forget all about it and get back to the real work. And what we came along and said was false.
Right.
It is the real work.
Recruiting is the real work.
It is the stuff. And you can't just ignore it. You can't get rid of it. You have to be really good at it. And the reason you're so sad and the reason that it's not working is because someone else down the street is trying harder and being smarter at it and winning. And you're losing. That feeling that you have, it's called losing. And you need to work hard, and you need to be a lot smarter, and you need to have better tools, of course, to do that. And if you do those things, you'll win, and it'll feel great. And that was a very different idea. And I think, fortunately, it was something that people were really excited to hear, and I think has really powered a lot of our growth anyway.
Definitely. Speaking of better tools, you write that Greenhouse is, quote, not trying to be the all-singing, all-dancing HR system. So do companies in this space try and do too much of that? Should recruitment tech buyers be aware of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I said that, I think the point I'm trying to make is that in the previous generation, there was a whole set of forces that acted on vendors that meant that you would inevitably create these very thin but very broad end-to-end, quote, HR systems,
right,
where ultimately you could check all the boxes on the CIO's RFP and they could buy your product. And it didn't matter if anybody wanted it or if it would work or if they'd use it. It just mattered that, hey, I need learning and I need core HR and I need recruiting and I need all this stuff. And I can go in there as my vendor and check all the boxes. And that stuff obviously sat there as shelfware and kind of rotted. And so I think what I would argue is that we're not in that world anymore. The buyers are much more the users, and the users are much more in control. And so by the time someone comes into Greenhouse and talks to our sales team, they've already seen case studies. They've already read all the content on our website. They already talked to other customers about what their experience has been. They know more about the product. And it's often not driven by just the recruiting team, but you've got a head of engineering who's struggling with building out their engineering team. You've got end users who are, annoyed at being sent into interview after interview with no preparation, with no idea who they're meeting with no resume, with no form to fill out afterwards. And so these end users are way more in control, and sort of that central IT buyer is way less of a gatekeeper, and they're more about how do I empower my users with the tools that they want? How do I let them use their iPhone at work? How do I give them, kind of these best of breed solutions? And so I think the point I was making is we don't have to water down Greenhouse with all these like checkboxes to be able to sell to today's buyer. We can focus on the areas that we can have strategic impact, where we can drive behavior change, or we can deliver meaningful value, and we can leave payroll to the payroll guys and learning to learning guys and so forth.
You've spoken a little bit to what that behavior change is. Could you give a few more examples of the kind of things that you're hoping, like areas Greenhouse will have that impact?
Yeah, well, I think the number one thing that we've done is around the interview, right? We've re-envisioned how the interview happens. In the old days, people would be sent into a conference room with a candidate and say, "Here, spend an hour with Bob and tell me if we should hire them." And you're literally making one of the biggest decisions of Bob's life, and you've had zero preparation.
Right.
You don't know who he's already spoken to at your company. You don't know why you're in this room. You don't know how to do an interview. You don't know what kind of feedback the team needs. And so you're left to sort of chit-chat with this person. Most people make an implicit decision within the first 30 seconds of sitting down and shaking your hand, and spend the other 59 and a half minutes
defending
smiling and nodding, right?
Yeah.
And reinforcing their implicit bias. And then they go back and they have to write an essay to the HR team about what they thought. It's a joke. And so I think by kind of reimagining that is much more of a designed process, where the team sits down up front and they say, let's design this experience. Like, how should the candidate move through our pipeline? What should they go through at each step? And why are we doing these things? Why are we having this interview in the first place? And how do we do a good job at it? What you realize is that you can then give that interviewer a way happier experience. They can walk in prepared and they can say, okay, I'm here to do our problem-solving case study, right? And I'm not going to ask this guy about his resume, and I'm not going to chit-chat about his hobbies. Someone else might do those things,
right?
But it's not my job. My job is to walk them through this problem-solving case study and to come away with a point of view of, is this person good or bad at these various things? And what you find is that it does two things. It helps the team make way smarter decisions, but also the candidates have a completely different view of your organization. I think vendors traditionally talk about candidate experience as if it were a technology issue, as
right.
if the main problem is that your website isn't as pretty as the other guys. I actually think most of the candidate experience is the hours and hours they spend talking to your team.
Absolutely.
And if that time is spent well on things that matter with focus, and not spent on going over my resume 40 times or answering silly brain teasers, they come away thinking, geez, this is a company that cares about its people, that's filled with, smart energy, and I want to work there. And that's the way to deliver both a better candidate experience and to make smarter decisions faster.
Absolutely. Scott, I know you have a similar philosophy in terms of interview segmentation, and you have 6 people or however many meeting that candidate. You say, this is what you cover, this is your responsibility, this is your scope of the interview. Is that kind of exactly what Daniel was explaining?
Yeah, it's definitely that. You want to make sure that there's a purpose for each of the discussions that individuals are having. What's interesting, though, is when you were talking about this notion of lifetime value, given that I'm responsible for marketing, I think about the sales process and what that means and how prepared a sales individual needs to be for a meeting. And they have to do their prep work. They have to understand who they're communicating with. And as you start to develop that process, the lifetime value of that customer should improve, because you're setting them up for success long term. And it's interesting, this notion of the lifetime value of a candidate or an employee of the organization. And I would bet that as you start to handle a very good onboarding from first touch all the way through to the point where they come into the company, and then later into the organization, if they've been promoted to and spoken to about that being important for the organization, and you've got a really tight process, that long term those people come in and it's like good culture add. It's all of the benefits of a well-managed process. The same way in sales and marketing, if you really think about how you're communicating with a particular prospect, and you sort of set them up for success and partner with them along the way, that they'll become more valued. Yeah,
I think that's right. And this idea of employee lifetime value came out of that same thinking, that in the subscription software world over the last decade, we've come to see these new metrics that aren't just like the old accounting measures of EBITDA and revenue, but the new sort of subscription economy has really thought deeply about this idea of kind of like acquiring a subscription customer and what are the things that you can do to maximize the value of that subscription and how much can you afford to acquire them. And that same kind of thinking translated to the HR world leads you down this path of thinking about, well, you invest something up front in getting an employee, and then you hope that employee stays with you a long time and delivers a lot of value. And then you start to have these same conversations of like, well, what can we do to increase that value and decrease the investment? And it's a different kind of conversation. It's, I think, at a way higher level, and I think people are really excited about it.
So just curious, like you've been in the space, you're kind of a visionary in the HR tech world. I'm curious what you think going into 2017. What's the biggest sort of point of innovation or something that you're most excited about as we enter into 2017?
Well, from our standpoint, I look around this convention hall here and I see, I don't know how many thousands of people and how many, thousands of booths. There's so much, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that have been poured into an innovation across the entire landscape of recruiting and more broadly across human capital technology. And traditionally, none of that stuff worked together. And so I think a big thing that we're interested in at Greenhouse is how can we make all that stuff work better together? We've got, as you guys know, a tremendous investment in our platform APIs and in bringing together partners to integrate, because customers, just like we talked about with interviewing, customers have difficulty understanding the value of making an investment in an Entelo. And so, you might have a really happy, loyal customer who changes jobs and wants to bring you in and says, well, to their boss, well, we should use Entelo. And the boss says, or the CFO says, well, why? And they have trouble justifying that investment. And I think
not so much with Entelo, but
I think they sometimes lack the language to explain. They say, oh, I really like it. It's really powerful. Or, but I think by tying together, like the sourcing tool by Entelo with the Greenhouse, then you can actually track that investment all the way through, and you can actually show in real terms the impact of sourcing through, one tool versus another, and track that all the way through to it generates better employees that are more aligned with our mission, that are more highly engaged, that perform better, that are less likely to leave, that give us more employee referrals, that onboard quicker. And this tool has helped me do that, build a more diverse workforce. And by giving them that data and by helping them tell that story in kind of more business terms across the whole ecosystem, I think we have a lot of opportunity to add value. So supporting the broader ecosystem of third parties, recruiting technology, and bringing that all together in a way that lets our customers tell a data story is a huge thing that we're really excited about investing a lot in this year.
Very cool.
I love it. Daniel, I could say you're talking to you all day, but you have a life to live and analyst briefings to get to, I'm sure. So I'll ultimately say thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast.
Thanks a ton. Appreciate it.